Hello, this is Mr. Brewer, and I'm going to be talking you through the final section of the relationships module for the Year 13 content. And this is on parasocial relationships. And what it is actually quite a descriptive topic rather than an explanation topic, where we have to look at the levels of parasocial relationships, the absorption addiction model, and the attachment theory explanation. And what you perhaps need to kind of obviously get your head around are kind of what parasocial relationships are. And what we see is the Jimmy Barnes TED Talk will get into this idea that we invest a massive amount of time and energy into characters such as Harry Potter and other series like that. And so she then goes on to define this idea of a parasocial relationship being a one-sided relationship with a character or a celebrity or person that is unaware of us. Okay, and the second video is just illustrating kind of what happens with a celebrity fan obsessions and how this one-sided type of relationship may kind of play itself out in the kind of real world. Okay, so this is my definition. So the idea of a parasocial relationship, it says here, is that they resemble normal relationships, but it is completely without the person being aware of our existence. So clearly in terms of a character in the book, this kind of makes sense because it's just a book, they're not going to ever kind of happen. The idea potentially from the TED Talk video is that, of course, when we read characters in a book or we watch a film or we get involved in a series, we kind of get these characters sharing intimate detail with us, telling us about things that they may not have told other characters. And as such, the reality for us is that we can see how factors affecting attraction. There'll be lots of things there. These people are kind of sharing kind of detail about themselves that we potentially want to enter into a relationship with us. Now, this idea of a fan is actually quite outdated in terms of it's 1956 and would have been specific to kind of this idea of a celebrity, but not really the celebrity kind of like we have now in terms of social media. But this idea of people kind of getting involved in people that are kind of out of reach them is not something which is new. It comes back from 1956, where it was defined as being a fan. So, how do we proceed? Now, the actual content asks us to look at levels of parasocial relationships. There's two things we need to have a look here. The levels come from Maltby, okay, but they use this celebrity attitude scale in order to determine how deep the level is. Now, there's three levels, of which the first one seems fairly kind of normal, entertainment and social, and I'd probably argue that many of us are in this particular category where we might talk with like-minded people about things that we're interested in terms of celebrities. Maybe you've been talking about how Princess Kate is kind of like not in the, haven't got any pictures of her at the moment, and people talk about her, or it could be that you like a particular character, or you listen to kind of music like Taylor Swift, and then you kind of obsessed about kind of shows and all these types of things like that. So the chances are, it just says here, it's the least intense level of celebrity worship, and you pretty much see the celebrity as a source of entertainment. Okay, so this is the key here, it's about entertainment. Okay, as we go down to the next level, we see here, this kind of starts to get a little bit stronger, because it says here we start to have strong feelings, and of course it's this idea that actually the celebrity and you, or the character and you, are potentially kind of soulmates, that if you actually did meet in the real world, in real life, you'd actually get along. Now, obviously slightly worrying that you would think this way, but clearly still not as kind of deep of a level as the borderline pathological. Trust me, anything with pathological may well be something we have to pay attention to. And so, of course, it uses words like uncontrollable, obsessive, okay? And so what we find at this particular stage is that this particular borderline pathological person will spend lots of money or put a lot of effort into actually meeting or attempting to meet the celebrity and try to get involved with him. Now, of course, and a lot of the stuff that we do will cost money, but like spending £5,000 to kind of do meet and greet, if you've got no money at all, seems a bit extreme. It's that type of idea of potentially kind of going out of your way in order to kind of interact with this particular celebrity. Okay, I think if you can remember the three titles, you probably could talk about it in some kind of way. And so you can see it's fairly descriptive and it kind of moves on quite quickly. The absorption addiction model kind of tries to take this idea of this, it says here that people who turn to parasocial relationships are trying to escape reality, but like a person who turns to alcohol or turns to drugs to escape the realities of their perhaps everyday hurt in their lives. Okay, so what we tend to see is that there are going to be two components here. So the first one, obviously, the absorption one, and this is where you would maybe use the levels of parasocial to kind of see that you get involved in the celebrity's life. In terms of like you try and find out things about the person, so facts. Maybe you do some research, maybe you look into their career, or any of those types of things, because searching the internet and watching videos, those types of things, any of those types of ideas, buying tickets and stuff like that, you just surround yourself with something that kind of makes you feel better. However, the addiction part, what's really important here is we use this word need. Remember tolerance and dependence in terms of addiction. We see this idea that actually they can't cope normally without this particular behaviour that they've been absorbing themselves into. So you become delusional, you become extreme, and we see stalking here becomes one of the things that could define this problematic behaviour in terms of addictive behaviour. So on a very basic level, you are forming a parasocial relationship because it fulfills a need in your life because of some kind of statement here would I say escape. Okay. So then the last model is the one that I think kind of makes the most sense. Possibly not as much research out there to support it, but if you look at this idea that not everyone has very strong attachment bonds, and so of course if you've had emotional difficulties in childhood, then of course you've had insecure attachment. And so what we're saying here is that we look at things like teenagers or young adults that have had parasocial relationships, they've often had attachment difficulties. Okay, so a couple of things we can say about this. So for example, an insecure avoidant child or insecure resistant child are going to have those difficulties, those parasocial relationships may occur to those types of people. Now, there are two ideas. One, for example, if you're insecure resistant, it means that you potentially have had rejection or abandonment. Maybe you have difficulty in personal relationships. Remember, these children came from parents who were inconsistent in their care, and so they may well be needy. And of course, what you have to appreciate is a celebrity or character in a book is never going to reject or abandon you because they don't actually know you or interact with you. We also see that if you are insecure avoidant, you perhaps want to avoid intimacy, okay? Or you want intimacy on your own terms. Now, of course, in face-to-face relationships, this may not be possible because you can't just kind of only interact with your partner when you kind of feel like it. And so, of course, the character in the book or character in the film is something that you can turn to when you want to be part of it. And so you can avoid people, but you can also equally then turn on intimacy when you feel like it. So just to kind of like make it clear to you, the essays will probably be quite descriptive. As long as you can go through each of those three explanations, you should be fine. You might be asked to do a 8-mark essay on just one of them, and so you need to be able to kind of just explain the parasocial aspect of the relationship. In terms of the evaluation points, so it says here that the model can predict behaviour, which is good, and it says there that when they're looking at people with the different scores on that particular scale, we could see that people who had their borderline pathological or intense personal tended to have high degrees of anxiety, in contrast to those people who were just literally entertaining and social and seemed to be kind of better off. And so there is a predictive nature of using that particular scale to understand people's behaviour. But the problem really is that how do we know whether a person has filled out the information kind of properly? Because most of the time, if they're filling out the questionnaire, it's self-report. Now, you need to be careful when you use self-report as an evaluation task because you're not focusing on the filling out the self-report questionnaire. You're arguing kind of what is the problem. So the problem in terms of the celebrity scale questionnaire is that people have warped perceptions of who they are. So you can either, for example, underrepresent your behaviour because you don't want people to think of you kind of poorly, so social desirability-wise, or you want people to actually see you, for example, as the biggest fan, so you might exaggerate it in order to get that particular idea. So ultimately, what you have is a particular scale that is flawed because it's not actually telling you the truth. Okay, and so of course, any understanding, it says here, any understanding of parasocial relationships is wrong because our way of collecting the data is flawed. So then, looking at the absorption addiction model, this one's quite interesting because it's kind of looking at this idea of people filling a gap or people kind of answering questions that like addiction would. And Maltby found that a particular group of females who had intense personal parasocial relationships with a particular celebrity also kind of considered their own body shapes and said that they also tended to have poor body images as well. Maltby was also able to show us that extroverted people are more likely to be entertained and social, and that we might have some kind of psychotic personality type could be linked to their behaviour, like the absorption addiction model. So there's quite a lot of evidence that maybe people who do have poor psychological functioning are people who enter into these parasocial relationships. Now, to counter this one is another kind of problem that we have, and the biggest problem is this idea is that all that the particular absorption addiction model can do is describe kind of what happens to a particular person, or if I look at the levels of parasocial relationships, it just tells me what they are, but not really explaining what causes it. Now, the absorption addiction model probably is the best or the easiest one to turn to for cause, or the attachment model, but we do need to kind of go, okay, so how is it that one person with one psychological functioning doesn't have a parasocial relationship but another one does? So there is a slight problem there that it's perhaps more useful to tell us about it rather than to explain it. Now, I quite like this particular point because, as you've seen from some of the videos and some of the things that I've done in lessons, I do quite like Harry Potter. And so one of the things we can say about parasocial relationships is that it potentially happens in a culturally similar way. Schmidt and Klimt looked at a particular kind of series of books, the Harry Potter books, and found, it says here, similar patterns of parasocial relationships with Harry Potter and other characters in the books. And these two covers of the book actually do highlight to us that different countries might focus on different things. For example, the German book focuses on the chess game in the first book, and yet the Spanish book, or the Mexican book, looks at kind of the flying and the unicorn as kind of the important aspects of what they're publishing on the front cover. But the key here, it says here, fans from both individualistic and collectivist cultures had similar patterns. Okay. And so it is possible that regardless of your interpretation of the book or regardless of your interpretation of the story, we do find that actually people relate to the characters in a very similar way. And so it says here, found commonalities between their own lives and relationships portrayed in the books. And that's possibly where parasocial relationships have a, a place to explain why they happen. Okay. Now, there's actually a example in your textbook that that uses something different other than Harry Potter, and it's found in Q8 versus US. Okay, and this is specific for the attachment theory. So, it's a very similar type of idea, trying to give us evidence to support that people potentially respond in a very similar way. Okay, so it's for you to potentially to choose which one you're going to have a look at. This is looking at Rachel from Friends, and I think it's a very helpful study to have a look at. Okay. Now, both of these do have a counter, and the counter is this one here, is that when McCutcheon actually looked into this and looked at quite a large proportion of participants, it says here that they found no direct relationship between attachment type and the likelihood of parasocial relationships. Now that's really important, is that possibly, despite perhaps similarities across cultures, we don't really find a direct link between the attachment type and parasocial relationships. Okay, so it fails to support our explanation. So all in all, there's not necessarily too much content there. It's quite nice that it's quite short. The truth of it for you is that you've got to plan the essays. You've got to look at things like this one. So this one's discuss attachment theory, and you can see it was an 8 mark specifically. Okay, so you have to plan for possibly 2 other 8 markers. So you have the levels of processing, levels of parasocial relationships and absorption addiction, or you could have a generic kind of full 16 mark looking at explanations of parasocial relationships as well. So there we have it. We have now, that's all the content we need to look at.